The wind whispered across golden fields as the sun bathed the land in warmth. Nestled between tall stalks of wheat and clusters of wildflowers, a tiny fairy named Faye stirred. Her translucent wings shimmered in the daylight, delicate as the petals she bloomed from. Unlike other fairies, she had no grand kingdom, no palace of shimmering light. Her home was the earth itself, the roots, the blossoms, the whispers of the wind carrying secrets across the land. Faye belonged to the wildflowers, a spirit of nature that thrived in sunlight and the soft touch of the breeze. She spent her days dancing between petals, painting the flowers with the hues of dawn, and singing to the wheat as it swayed like waves in the ocean. She had lived undisturbed for centuries, unseen by mortal eyes, until the day she met him. Nolan was a simple farmer, his hands calloused from working the land. He moved with the rhythm of the seasons, planting, harvesting, and tending to the fields with devotion. Unlike the others in the village, he spoke to the plants, treating them like friends rather than mere crops. This fascinated Faye. Hidden among the wildflowers, she watched him, mesmerized by his laughter, the kindness in his eyes, and the way he treated the land with respect. One evening, as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, Nolan rested against an old oak tree near the wildflowers. He exhaled deeply, a tired but content smile on his face. Faye, unable to resist, flitted closer, her tiny feet barely brushing the leaves. That was the first time their eyes met. For a moment, Nolan believed he was dreaming. A tiny, radiant figure with wings like dewdrops hovered before him, her presence like a whisper of magic in the air. His breath caught in his throat. "You're beautiful," he murmured. Faye's cheeks turned the color of dawn. No human had ever spoken to her before. No human had ever seen her before. And so, their story began. Days turned into weeks, and Faye and Nolan grew closer. Every morning, as the first light kissed the fields, she would greet him with laughter as he worked. She perched on his shoulder as he plowed the land, twirled around him as he watered the plants, and hummed sweet melodies that made his crops flourish stronger than ever before. In return, Nolan told her stories of the world beyond the fields, the bustling marketplace, the ocean that stretched endlessly, the towering mountains that scraped the sky. Faye listened with wide, curious eyes, longing to see these wonders but knowing she could never leave the land that gave her life. As the sun set, they would sit together beneath the oak tree, Nolan telling her his dreams. He wished to grow the finest wheat, to make bread that would feed his entire village, to one day have a family of his own. Faye wished for nothing but him, his voice, his warmth, his presence. But there was one thing she had never told him. She was a wildflower fairy. Her existence depended on the land, the sunlight, and the warmth of those she loved. If she was left alone for too long, her magic would wither, her body growing weaker, her petals falling like autumn leaves. And one day, Nolan unknowingly put her fragile heart to the test. "I must go to the market tomorrow," he said one evening, brushing his fingers through the tall grass. "I'll be back before nightfall, Faye." The words were simple, but to Faye, they were a quiet storm in her chest. He had never left before. Not for this long. She smiled, masking the fear in her heart. "I'll wait for you," she whispered. But as the sun rose the next morning, and Nolan disappeared down the dirt path toward the village, Faye felt it, the creeping chill, the slow unraveling of her magic. The moment he left, she wilted. Faye tried to fight it. She clung to the stems of wildflowers, her tiny hands trembling as she struggled to keep her wings beating. But with every passing hour, her glow dimmed. The warmth of the sun was not enough. The whispers of the wind were not enough. She needed Nolan. By midday, her wings lost their shimmer. The petals in her hair began to curl and brown. Her breath grew shallow, her tiny form growing weaker. The flowers she had once danced upon drooped beside her, mirroring her slow decline. Still, she held on. He promised to come back. The sky turned a brilliant shade of amber as the sun began to dip. The distant sound of cart wheels creaked along the path. Nolan was returning. But Faye could barely lift her head. Her heartbeat was faint, her body sinking into the petals that had once been her home. The last thing she saw was his silhouette running toward her. Then, darkness. When Nolan reached the wildflowers, he froze. Faye's tiny form lay among the petals, her wings dull, her glow gone. His heart clenched painfully, his hands trembling as he dropped to his knees. "Faye," his voice cracked. Silence. His vision blurred as tears welled in his eyes. He had left her. He hadn't known, hadn't realized. If he had, he never would have gone. A single tear slipped from his cheek and fell onto her still form. Then another. Then another. Each tear that touched the ground shimmered, sinking into the soil. The earth beneath his hands trembled ever so slightly, as if something unseen was stirring beneath the surface. Then, before his very eyes, a miracle. A small bud pushed its way through the dirt, unfurling soft, delicate petals of the purest gold. The flower was unlike anything he had ever seen before, its petals shimmering like sunlight, its center glowing faintly, almost as if it was alive. And then he knew. Faye was still here. The wind whispered through the wheat, carrying a voice as soft as the breeze. "I never left," it said. Nolan's lips trembled into a smile. From that day forward, the golden wildflower never wilted, never faded. Each morning, when the sun rose, it glowed, its petals opening as if greeting him. And though Nolan never saw Faye again in her fairy form, he felt her in every sunrise, in every breeze, in every golden petal that swayed in the fields. For love, even in its most fragile form, never truly dies.